Good evening, and welcome to the Committee of 70's 120th anniversary event, America at a Crossroads. If we'd only known. My name's Eric Kreitler. I'm privileged to be the chair of the board of the Committee of 70, and I want to begin by thanking Chris Wallace and Tamala Edwards. You're the best at what you do. You honor us with your presence, and we're looking forward to a lively discussion this evening as we all seek to process and put in perspective the election and the events that have followed. Thank you also to our many sponsors and supporters, including in particular our presenting sponsors, Brandywine Realty Trust and the Lau Longsworth Charitable Fund. And thank you, and a very personal thank you, to 70's fabulous board of directors. Approximately 70 members strong, a diverse group of civic leaders, including representatives from Philadelphia's leading business, professional, academic, cultural, and civic institutions. And of course, thank you to our president and CEO, Lauren Cristella, and our small but mighty staff. They worked their hearts out in the weeks leading up to the election, and then they turned on a dime to put this event together tonight. Deeply grateful to them. We appreciate all of you being here this evening, but I want to acknowledge in particular the members of City Council, the members of the region's congressional delegation, and the members of the state legislature who are joining us this evening. Thank you. This evening we celebrate 70's 120th birthday. In 1904, Philadelphia was the third largest city in the United States. City Hall was the tallest building in the world. The brand new Bellevue Stratford Hotel was recognized widely as the most luxurious hotel in America. Philadelphia was known as the workshop of the world because of its manufacturing dominance across a broad range of industries. And our city government and our civic culture also were known far and wide for corruption and complacency. In the words of the journalist Lincoln Steffens, the most corrupt and the most contented city in the nation. On November the 14th, 1904, a group of business and civic leaders met at the old Bourse Building, and they decided to do something about that corruption and complacency. And within days, the Committee of 70 was formed, taking its name from the Bible and the 70 elders appointed to help Moses in governing the people. During the last 120 years, the desire for better government and fair elections has turned into a movement. Our goals have never changed. Clean and effective government, informed citizens, free, fair, and secure elections. Throughout the 20th century and beyond, we have maintained cohesion and relevance, and never more so than in the 2020 election. We proudly worked with the Secretary of State, the Philadelphia City Commissioners, and thousands of everyday Philadelphians to share information, to promote transparency, to counter misinformation, and to ensure, to the extent we could, that every eligible vote was counted. We helped to recruit and train hundreds of poll workers. We partnered with over 200 business, labor, and nonprofit organizations to drive election turnout on a nonpartisan basis, and to encourage participation in the election process through our signature We Vote program. More than 80 schools in 27 Pennsylvania counties and 18,000 students participated in our PA Youth Mock Election. We worked to safeguard the integrity of our elections and to ensure a smooth voting experience and to celebrate the right to vote. At a time when citizens were seeking trusted voices and sources of information, our president, Lauren Cristella, and other members of our senior staff made over 100 local television appearances. From a nonpartisan standpoint, there were many positives about the 2024 election. Voters were engaged. Voter turnout was high. In Philadelphia, more than 65% of registered voters cast ballots. In Pennsylvania, it was more than 70%, substantially more than 70%. For the most part, poll workers and election workers were not subject to disruption or intimidation. And for the most part, disputes were resolved in the courts where they should be. In Philadelphia, the election workers exceeded all expectations, notwithstanding state election law that prohibited pre-canvassing of mail-in ballots before Election Day. Our election workers worked throughout the night and substantially completed their counting of mail-in ballots by early Wednesday morning. But from a nonpartisan perspective, the election also revealed persistent challenges to democracy. As a nation, we are deeply divided, and the structures of our politics, including in particular closed primaries, deepen those divisions. There is a profound lack of trust in America's institutions, including elected officials, political parties, the press, and traditional media. Many people believe that America's best days are behind us. Many are losing faith in democracy to solve our problems and to improve the lives of ordinary Americans. Some are indifferent as to whether we continue as a democracy. We are not among them. We believe that the best days for American democracy can be ahead. We will continue to seek legislative reforms that will improve our elections, open primaries, allowing earlier pre-canvassing of ballots, putting a stop to the rejection of ballots based on immaterial dating errors. We will continue to engage young people and invest in civics education. We believe the potential exists for a reinvigorated democracy, for a deeper and more continuous connection between elected officials and their constituents, and better government generally. For 120 years after that fateful meeting at the Bourse Building, the story goes on and the work continues. Thank you again for supporting the work of the Committee of 70. And with that, I'd like to introduce George Hasenich, my friend and fellow board member, the co-chair of 70's Policy Committee, and the Senior Vice President Investments of our presenting sponsor, Brandywine Realty Trust. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. All right, we got a couple of you. Since 2011, Brandywine Realty Trust has been honored to serve as the presenting sponsor for this esteemed event. Our partnership with the Committee of 70 reflects our deep respect for their mission to advance representative, ethical, and effective government, both in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, through civic engagement, citizen engagement, and public policy advocacy. At Brandywine, we're guided by our core values of quality, innovation, integrity, and community. These principles resonate with the Committee of 70's commitment to integrity and transparency in government. Together, we strive to foster environments that prioritize the public's interests and promote active civic engagement. Our collaboration underscores a shared dedication to building vibrant communities and trustworthy institutions. We believe that by working together, we can create spaces and systems that inspire and empower individuals to participate fully in our democracy. To further illustrate our commitment to innovation and excellence, it is my pleasure to introduce a brief video which showcases Brandywine Realty Trust's efforts to shape, connect, and inspire the communities we serve. Thank you.
Real estate is beyond just the act of doing, it's what it can create. The value is not just the physical space, it's how the physical space is incorporated into the culture of the organization.
One thing that we're finding in this next generation of office buildings is that we're going to be giving people choices. We're going to be giving them great choices of multiple places where they can work.
The Brandywine Way is really defined based on our core value system, and that encompasses the physical and the cultural. So I think one of the things that differentiates a Brandywine building from other buildings is the thoughtfulness that we have in thinking through every single component part of our building.
Landlord-tenant relationship. The key to me is relationship. You look for a partner. You look for someone who will listen to you.
Our objectives is always to provide our tenants with design services that will maximize their overall efficiency and create the most flexible spaces for them to adjust and pivot as time goes on.
When you think about what's changed, that hybrid work still requires an in-office component, and it remains extremely important.
Employees expect so much more out of their workplace now than they ever did before. Can they go into a conference room and collaborate with their team members? Do they have space to have deep thought time in a quieter huddle room or in their own private office?
That employees that have daylighting, that have natural air, that have all of these external resources within the building perform better, work better, and certainly help achieve greater value for the companies that they work for.
Brandywine is really ahead of the curve in merging the physical and the virtual services and amenities that we offer our tenants every day.
We always knew there was this push of technology where it created additional mobility, portability of ideas, created different avenues for people to collaborate. You need that central fulcrum, that nexus of ideas. One of the most tangible ways an employer shows value to their employees is by the space that they give them to exercise their craft in.
There is not a single Brandywine project that's simply a building. It's always something more. And it's those details that make a Brandywine building special. It's all by design to help you and your employees succeed.
Good evening. Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Christella, and I am so proud to be the president and CEO of the Committee of 70. I want to give a big welcome to our honored guests, including our board members, sponsors, and elected officials, Congresswoman Scanlon, Representative Nielsen, and Council members Landau, Phillips, and Young. Thank you all for joining us to celebrate the Committee of 70's 120th anniversary. I'm so proud of the incredible team at the Committee of 70 who absolutely left it all on the field in this election cycle. This team hosted more than 100 info sessions for voters, over 30 information sessions for poll workers, engaged students in 85 schools across 27 counties, and supported election officials in Philadelphia and across the Commonwealth. And tonight, we've accomplished something remarkable yet again. A record-breaking fundraiser that brought in more than $575,000 to sustain this important work. I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you to our 70 team, our volunteers, and to each of you for joining us this evening. You're probably here because you believe in the promise of our democratic republic and want to see our local democracy thrive. I'm here today because encouraging people to be more active citizens is my life's work. That started actually here at the Constitution Center. I'm humbled and grateful to lead this remarkable organization at this critical moment, when strengthening our local democracy is more important than ever. While presidential elections often dominate headlines and are deeply consequential, it's local government that shapes the communities where we live, work, and raise our families. From our schools and parks to public safety and transportation, the decisions made at the local level affect every aspect of our daily lives in real and lasting ways. By staying engaged locally, we ensure that our voices are heard where change is most immediate and most personal, while also building a foundation for broader civic participation. I don't know about you, but I have been asked many, many times, what are we going to do after this election? And I'm going to tell you, we will move forward, bolder than ever, committed to sharing facts and helping combat misinformation. We will help our young people understand the power of their voices and empower all voters to be informed. We will connect people to their government in new and proven ways. For 120 years, we've been at the forefront of this work, and we are just getting started. We will continue to fight for the Committee of 70's values from City Hall to Harrisburg. We will continue to expand our partnerships to bring more people closer to their government and encourage active participation in local democracy, including its obligations and its responsibilities. We will continue to work tirelessly to reach every corner of our beloved city, the region, and the Commonwealth, providing resources that engage our youngest Pennsylvanians through our work with the PA Civics Coalition. We will continue to share and expand how Philly works to help people navigate government and understand its impact on their lives. We will, of course, continue to inform and engage voters twice a year, every year, ensuring they understand why every election matters and how to successfully cast their vote. And we will continue to advocate for policy change to strengthen our institutions and make our government more representative, effective, and accountable. Your support makes all of this possible. Together, we can create a government that truly represents the people it serves, not just by informing every eligible voter, but by inspiring active citizenship year-round and advancing policies that drive meaningful change. We need you to join us in this work now more than ever. So there's a QR code on the back page of your program that can help you join the Committee of 70 as one of our members. And I encourage each of you to sign up right now. I won't even be offended if you pull out your phones. Take them and do that. There are benefits, including terrific swag, but most importantly, 70 membership offers opportunities to hear from policy experts, volunteer with our organization, and support our work to bring about a vision for a vibrant local democracy and a local and state government worthy of the public's trust. And now I'm pleased to introduce tonight's program. Months ago, when we were deep in planning mode for this 2024 election cycle and envisioning the impact we wanted to have this year, we had the very tall order of selecting a speaker that could address a room of our city's remarkable business, civic, and philanthropic leaders, following what was absolutely sure to be a contentious election. We wanted someone who could offer insights about what just happened and where we're headed, regardless of the outcome. That's why veteran news anchor Chris Wallace is here with us this evening to share the history of the 1960 election recounted in his new book, which you'll all receive on your way out, but also to help us make sense of the current moment we're in, how we got here, and what the possible roads forward may be. There is no one better positioned to shed light on this moment than Chris Wallace, and I'm so honored to have him join us tonight. 6ABC's morning anchor and Inside Story host, Tamala Edwards, is here because there is truly no one better to navigate an insightful conversation about our past, present, and future, who has their finger on the pulse of our region. So please join me in welcoming Tamala and Chris to the stage.
So I want to see if you've learned your lesson. Good evening.
Indeed. Good evening, and thank you to all of you for being here. Chris, it's an honor to get to spend some time with you. I think we have a few things to talk about.
We do have a few things to talk about. Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming today, and Lauren, thank you for those really kind words.
You know, you come both as a journalist and a historian. You've got this book, which you should all buy, make sure that you read. But you also have a perspective over time, over history, and when we talk about this moment, when we talk about Trump and others, it's interesting to me because you'll hear people bring up other times, the rise and reign of Andrew Jackson, America in the 1850s, America in the 1930s. All kinds of things get thrown about. I personally, if I heard the word unprecedented one more time in this election or historical, do you really feel as though we're in a different place, or do you feel as though there are call-outs to history that inform where we are now?
Well, as as old as I may seem, and as long as I've been around, I can't speak really firsthand about Andrew Jackson in the 1820s or the 1850s. I can speak very much in my lifetime. It's a very, I'm not going to use the words that you hate. It's an extraordinary time, and a time, I think, for legitimate concern. And, in fairness to Trump, he's not coming in under false colors. He made it very clear how he wanted, what his administration would be, how he intended to govern. And what we have seen in just over 2 weeks, which is very long, as he's been racing to name his cabinet and other members of his administration, is that he's true to his word. And it's going to be a bumpy ride.
I think a lot of people have been prepared for a very long week, lawsuits, all kinds of things. They were surprised by the swiftness of the results, the wide swath of different people who came towards him. And I'm sure from the coffee shop to the newsroom, people have asked you your theory of the case, which I think the question somewhat boils down to, did people go towards him, away from her? Could anyone have done this? When people say to you, Chris, what happened here? What has your answer been?
Well, I think a few things. I think certainly part of it, and I was widely quoted on election night at 5 o'clock, the first CNN exit polls came out, and one of the polls was, and this is the classic question in any election, is the country on the right track or the wrong track? Sometimes it's asked, are we headed in the right direction or the wrong direction? And the answer was 25% right track, 75% wrong track. I don't, in my experience as a journalist, I've never heard that one-sided a number, and as I said then, it would take a miracle for Kamala Harris to win an election if that's in fact the way people felt. She represented, and I think appropriately so, how the country was being governed at that time. She was part of the administration, the Biden-Harris administration. She was responsible for the decisions that had been made, and people wanted change. And as much as she tried to talk about a new, let's turn the page, a new way forward, I think she was unable to persuade people that she was an agent of change as opposed to mostly an agent of the status quo. And oddly enough, maybe the most devastating moment for her in the entire campaign, her short 100-day campaign, was when she was on what seemed to be a friendly venue, The View, and she was asked, what would you have done differently than Biden over these last 4 years? And she said, nothing comes to mind. That was a bad answer, and an unforgivable answer in terms of something you should have been prepared for and have had a good, strong answer, to separate yourself and say, if you're not happy with the way things are going, I'm the solution, not part of the problem. Conversely, I think that there is a tremendous support in this country, whether people want to acknowledge it or not, for Donald Trump, for disruption, for a sense of alienation from the establishment, from Washington, from the inside game, from the elites, financially, politically, and culturally, which we can talk about. But so I think in a country where people were very unhappy with the present course and really wanted change and disruption, they thought Trump was the answer and Kamala Harris was not.
Pollsters will look at lots of different things, and they'll say that the threads of this were always there, but people do a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking and wondering, well, if so-and-so had been the candidate, if so-and-so had been the candidate, is that the right idea, that another candidate might have made a difference? Or when you looked at all the different aspects, the Democrats were in a lot of trouble for a long time. Nobody would have made a difference.
Well, I take half of your premise, and the other part is unknowable. Democrats were in a lot of trouble. I mean, one can argue whether they should have been. I mean, the economy, obviously, by most macro analyses, is doing really well. We've got 2 point whatever inflation, 4% unemployment. The stock market hits record highs every week. It's a very prosperous country, but particularly for people, Trump's base, people in the lower middle class and working class, people without college educations, that's not what they feel. That's not their lived experience. And statistics mean nothing to somebody. What particularly people who feel they're struggling, whether it's going to the grocery store and a box of cereal is now $9, inflation has gone down, prices aren't rising at the rate they were, but prices haven't come down. Young people trying to buy a home feel that that's more out of reach than ever. People felt that immigration, that we all saw the pictures of people just streaming across the border without any stopping of them. During the 4 years of the Biden administration, 3 times as many, almost 8 million people came across the border illegally as compared to the Trump administration, where it was about 2 million. So, I mean, there were certainly reasons for people to be unhappy. But having said that, this is the part where it's unknowable. My own view is that Biden had a very successful first 2 years, had a remarkably successful midterm election in 22, which first midterms for new presidents usually are pretty rough, and he had minimal losses in the Congress. And had he lived up to the basic promise, I think, that most people thought he made when he ran in 20, that he was going to be a bridge to a new and different Democratic Party and to the future, had he dropped out then, I think he would have been viewed as a very successful president who accomplished a lot and the most important thing in the view of a lot of people was he extracted the country from the hold of Donald Trump. But by staying on against, as all of us watched and many of us winced at the way he walked and the way he talked and his what seemed to be obvious cognitive struggles, I think he made it impossible for the Democrats. I think dropping out when he did, under the circumstances that he did after that absolutely disastrous debate in June, and I'm not, at that point, clearly nobody, I don't think, could have beaten Trump on 100 days. But had there been a real primary system and had people gone through the ups and downs and seen, and there's a very extraordinarily strong Democratic bench. I could list a lot of names, so could all of you, various governors, various members of the cabinet, various senators. Do I think one of those candidates who had earned the nomination and the country had had an opportunity to get to know, I'd like to have seen that race.
I do think there's a governor that people here might have thought of. I want to talk a little bit about Trump. If you look at what he managed to do, 40% of Latinos, 30% of people of color, 20% of black men. When you hear him talk, and those who will go into the administration, they're talking mandate. We have a mandate. But mandates can be tricky things. That's saying that people are embracing you, they're embracing MAGA, more than they are pushing something else away. Is he right to see this as a mandate that they want what he has listed in terms of the MAGA agenda? Or are there pitfalls in that? That some of those people who came towards him, he still has to prove some things to them. He shouldn't assume they're all in with what he's listed.
Absolutely. I mean, just as in 20 people were saying, well, did people vote for Joe Biden or did they vote against Trump? I think some people will say now, well, did they really vote for Donald Trump? And a lot did. But I think a lot of them were also very dissatisfied with the current situation. Having said that, politicians generally, when they win, tend to see mandates. And although the number, his percentage of the vote, he is going to win the popular vote as well as the electoral vote, which of course he didn't in 2016. But the number, as they continue to count votes in California, is now under 50%. At the last I saw, it's 49.9%. You know, on the other hand, there were 7 swing states, and he won all of them, narrowly, but he won all of them. You know, the race didn't go on for 4 days. It was called, I think, 5, 6 o'clock on Wednesday morning. You know, he ran, he made it clear how he intended to govern, and I think he's entitled to pursue that. Having said that, you know, one of the mistakes that politicians often make, successful politicians, is they overread their mandate, and I kind of think you're beginning to see that already with Trump. I mean, did people want him over a continuation of Biden policies? Yes. But did that mean nominating somebody who has been under investigation by the Justice Department and House Ethics for a couple of years for sex and drug offenses to be the Attorney General? I don't think so. Did it mean taking somebody who is a vaccine denier and has spoke in just countless ways, if you look at it, has spoken out against science? Did they vote for that? Maybe some did. I think a lot of people didn't. And, you know, we could go on and on. So, you know, I mean, we'll see. I mean, in the end, the results will be the results. People will either feel in their lived experience that their lives are better and things are calmer, and, you know, the economy, if prices aren't going down, that we're getting a hold on that the immigration flood has been turned off, that we don't have all these wars that we're involved in around the world, or they won't. Or maybe they will find that the way that Trump ends the wars, for instance in Ukraine, which perhaps is kind of an accommodation to Putin and his aggression, maybe they won't like that. I mean, we have to wait and see. But I don't think you can say that Trump came in under false colors. I mean, he was pretty clear about how he intended to run, that he intended to be, you know, a guy who says, I'm your retribution, I'm your voice. I think he made it clear he was not going to be Mr. Nice Guy this time.
There are some presidents more than others capture the zeitgeist, and you could certainly say Trump is that way. There's something about him that people who attach to him really attach to him. You've spent a lot of time thinking about Kennedy, Nixon. In 1960, many people would say the way people attached to Kennedy was something special. And I wondered, as you've watched Trump over the entire time, certainly this last year, as you were thinking about Kennedy and Nixon, thinking about Kennedy and just that ability for some politicians to attach to the public, what came to mind?
Well, I wrote this book, Countdown 1960, about the Kennedy-Nixon election. I don't think that Kennedy's hold on the country was nearly as strong as Trump's. I mean, Kennedy, after the 50s, which actually were a time of considerable peace and prosperity, you know, was saying it's time for a new frontier, it's time to turn the page, that there was a need for change after 8 years of Dwight Eisenhower, who was still a very popular president. I think his popularity was over 60%. And Nixon was not a particularly prepossessing opponent, but he didn't have the kind of base emotional tie with his base, his political base that Donald Trump has. I mean, part of it was he hadn't been president for 4 years. He didn't, it seems to me, excite the same kind of emotion and I'm thinking of the word almost fealty that I think Trump does. He certainly tapped into a mood of the country, but I don't think that he had the same emotional attachment between millions of American voters and Kennedy that Trump has.
What about the bookends of the media? Kennedy, Nixon, sort of the rise of the media as a political force. Certainly that debate and the way Nixon came across made a difference versus now, where rather than a consolidation in the power, we see almost a fracturing of the media. Your sort of thoughts on the two bookends of that moment?
Yeah, so for those who may not know, one of the key sort of set pieces in my book is the first debate between presidents, which was also the first debate on television between presidents in 1960. And it was a real turning point in the campaign. Kennedy was 42, turning 43. Nixon was 47. There wasn't that big a difference in age, but Nixon had been vice president for 8 years. Kennedy had been, except for the politics side of it, had not been a big player in Washington and was seen as kind of a rich, spoiled young man. But when they appeared on that stage together in September of 1960, 70 million people watched, which was, first of all, a lot of people in a country of less than 200 million people. And it was a phenomenon. I was 13 and I remember watching it. And you know, the stature gap between the two, which was a real Nixon advantage, just disappeared in that one night. Kennedy had rested. He had a tan, even though it was in black and white. You could see that he looked really healthy. The background was sort of a gray background, and he wore a dark blue suit, and he really stood out. He also very much realized that the only audience that counted was the audience in that television camera there. So he spoke directly to the audience. Nixon, who had had a serious staph infection, he got an infection in his knee and then had suffered from the flu, was about 10 pounds underweight. His collar was hanging from his neck. He always had a problem. He had a kind of a 5 o'clock shadow. And when they offered makeup to Kennedy, he said, no, I don't need it. And they offered it to Nixon, who really did need it, and he refused to take it. And as a result, well, as Richard J. Daley, who was the mayor of Chicago, said during the course of the debate, obviously very much a Kennedy fan, he said, my God, they embalmed him before he died. He looked like hell. And he also treated it like a college debate and, you know, was responding to the points, but not particularly looking at the audience. At one point, when Kennedy had said something about, you know, the Democratic Party as opposed to the Republican Party, and now it was time for Nixon's to respond, he said no comment. He just gave away his time, which is unthinkable in debates. You know, the media world is just so completely different now than it was then. You know, I don't know that the media necessarily played such a huge role in that election, but you know, at that point there were really 2.5 networks, because there was CBS and NBC, and ABC really hadn't become a full network at that point. In fact, on election night, while CBS and NBC were from 7 o'clock at night all night, ABC went to entertainment programming for most of the evening and then came back to the election in the middle of the night. But that media world, which, you know, I was describing it earlier as kind of a pyramid with local stations and newspapers and a couple of national newspapers and then 2.5 networks, was a much more concentrated force in American life and American politics. Today, it's sort of let 1,000 flowers bloom. And, you know, you've got the 3 major networks, you've got 3 cable news channels, you have countless podcasts and blogs and video blogs and, you know, all manner of things. So, you know, the country, just in general, doesn't have the same shared experience that we used to have, because somebody who watches Fox News as opposed to somebody who watches MSNBC, I mean, they're seeing 2 very different accounts of the country. And, you know, I was saying earlier, talking to some graduate students from the Fells School here at the University of Pennsylvania, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the late senator from New York, one of his famous sayings was, you know, you're entitled to your own opinions, but you're not entitled to your own facts. Well, in today's world, people have their own facts, and they have a completely different reading and understanding, not their opinions, but what they think the reality of the country is, the reality of various figures in the country, their success or their failure, their effectiveness or lack of same. So it's a completely different world.
I want to stay on that for a minute because, I mean, if I hear one more person tell me, well, I did my research, what does that mean? Including my father, where did you do your research? It's interesting to me to watch this fracturing. You know, you have announced you're leaving CNN, you're going to streaming. Hoda said she's leaving the Today Show, she's going to streaming. Ezra Klein today said he's starting a YouTube channel. We see any number of newsletters, like people are going into so many places. It's hard to remember a time when everybody watched Walter Cronkite and got the local newspaper and we were all on the same page. And people will say this is terrible, but then sometimes birth is messy and it could be leading us somewhere wonderful. What is your perspective on it?
Well, I mean, I can talk about my personal perspective, but that's less interesting, I think, than sort of my advice. People sometimes say to me, well, how should we consume the news? And I always say, either watch or read something that challenges your assumptions. That if you're a conservative, watch Fox News, but read the New York Times. If you're a liberal, watch MSNBC, but read the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal. You know, I kind of feel that, and I know a lot of people don't have the time or the interest in doing this, but I do it myself because it's almost like a GPS. I want to be able to see how different people read the situation and then figure out where I should be. But having heard different arguments and different accounts of things, you know, if you are getting all of your research from a media outlet that has a distinct point of view, that's your research is going to have a distinct point of view, and you know, oftentimes that's what people like. I mean, you look at cable news right now, and Fox is very much to the right, is the most successful channel, and although interestingly enough for both MSNBC and CNN, the audiences have cratered since the election. It's like people have just said, I don't want to watch it. Leave me alone. But, you know, generally speaking, people have wanted news that amplifies what they already think. I think that's not the right way to go about things.
Do we get bored with that eventually?
Evidently not.
Well, I mean, Lauren brought up disinformation. It's not new. At the start of the Republic, you would go out on the streets and people would have broadsheets slapped up in public places with all kinds of lies, and the men in that room would sit down and write a letter and say that's not true. Now it moves a lot faster. If we open our phones right now, we can find all kinds of things that somebody literally did make up. Do we continue to fight with this, or do people come full circle and say, I'm tired of being yanked around, and I do make my way back to something I trust? Or we're through the looking glass, we don't come back?
Well, but when you say something you trust, I think the vast majority, as somebody who worked at Fox for 18 years, and I'll just take them because they're the most successful, I think the audience at Fox really does trust them. And
I didn't mean Fox, I meant anybody with a Twitter account can put something up there, and because people...
Oh, well, that's different. That's different. Although some people would say it's not so different. You know, I mean, I do think that it is important to find news sources that have an editorial process, that frankly have some skin in the game, as we saw in the case of Fox, where they had to pay $787 million because of the disinformation about Dominion voting machines, that there's a real price to be paid when you spread information that isn't true. And you know, that very much acts, generally speaking, and it certainly has been the case of the places that got hit with that, where they're now self-regulating. So I certainly, you know, if I had a choice between a news organization and somebody in his pajamas in his mother's basement, I think I'd go with the news organization. But having said that, you know, what's a news organization? I mean,
right.
is Fox a news organization? Is MSNBC a news organization? What do you say? I mean, you got to get your way through it. My own feeling is that I want to hear differing points of view and try to figure out what makes sense. But there are a lot of people who don't. A lot of people just want to hear what they want to hear.
They want a warm bath every day.
Yeah.
Fox has managed, in some ways like Trump, to create a culture and a mind meld with its audience. Some podcasters, Joe Rogan, clearly has done this. And you talk about the cratering ratings for MS and CNN. The Democrats in general, you hear people wondering, can they replicate what Fox has done? And you certainly hear, can we get a Rogan? And I'm like, you can't go to Target in aisle 8 and just get a Rogan. But is it replicable?
I don't know. I mean, the obvious thing would be to say yes. Why shouldn't there? I mean, this is a 50-50 country, and if he won by 1 or 2% more than she did, that means she got a hell of a lot of votes too. So, why wouldn't they? But it does seem, I mean, the fact is, for some reason, that, you go back to the end of the fairness doctrine and the rise of opinion radio on AM and the rise of Rush Limbaugh, and, now you've got Rogan. Although Rogan, I don't know how many of you listen to him, Rogan is not a hard right conservative. He certainly speaks for kind of a bros mentality and has very much built a bros audience, but he's not, I wouldn't compare him to Fox News in terms of having a coherent agenda that he's trying to sell. I mean, it's almost more a sensibility in his case, a way of viewing authority in the world. But to answer your direct question, I don't know why, but has there ever been a radio liberal Rush Limbaugh? No. Has there ever been a streaming liberal Joe Rogan? No.
Maybe it's just something not in the liberal DNA, though maybe somebody will replicate it. We will see. Quickly on the debates, Donald Trump famously this year did not do any of the primary debates. He did one with Kamala Harris.
And one with Biden.
And one with Biden. And one would say that he lost the one, many people said, with Harris, but it did not seem to matter. And I wondered, as you thought about the Kennedy-Nixon debate, is that something that we may not see anymore? We may not see debates anymore, or that they may not really matter anymore?
Well, the fact that they aren't dispositive, that it isn't what ends up deciding the election, is different than saying that they don't matter. I had the great good fortune of moderating 2 presidential debates when they were being done by the Commission on Presidential Debates, which started in 1988 and was the sole authority until this cycle. And I got to do the last debate between Clinton and Trump in 2016, and the first debate, the train wreck between Trump and Biden in 2020, where, not that I still hold a grudge, but Trump interrupted me or Biden 145 times in 90 minutes. And I recently got out of therapy about all of that. I actually thought, and it's just my opinion, I thought Trump lost the debate that I moderated in 2016, and in fact, I think, and how do you judge winning and losing? I don't know that Kennedy, interestingly enough, the Kennedy-Nixon debate, people who listened on radio thought Nixon won the debate. People who watched it on TV thought Kennedy won the debate. So winning the debate oftentimes, and I would certainly argue in the case of the first debate in 1960 between Kennedy and Nixon, was as much or maybe more about cosmetics and appearance than it was, and persona, than it was about any kind of who scored more points on points of policy. There's just a general impression. It seems, it feels to me like Trump's supporters don't really care. I mean, I thought the debate here was in Philadelphia, I said on the air, I thought it was a shutout. I thought that Kamala Harris just beat him on every point, but people didn't seem to care, or at least Trump supporters didn't seem to care, and it didn't seem to make that much of a difference. As to whether or not they matter when there'll be any, some people say, well, have they run their course? In a world where, I talked about the media and how we're all divided up and there's no shared experience. Short of the Super Bowl, presidential debates may be the single biggest attraction there is. This was a little different because it wasn't being done by the Commission on Presidential Debates. One was done by CNN and run on the other networks. The other was done by ABC and ran on the other networks. But my two debates both got over 70 million people watching them. And I think the first Biden-Trump debate got 60 million. I think the second one got 50 million. That's a heck of a big audience in today's world. Nothing gets that. The Academy Awards don't get it. The World Series doesn't get it. So there's still a real interest among the American public to see these two candidates against each other.
Throughout your history in covering politics, people have made assumptions about certain parts of the electorate. Blacks do this, Latinos do that, the working class does this, the religious do that. I think this election in many ways changed that because so many people shocked people with what they did. Is that a good thing and a recalibration of politics? I've often heard people in the Black community say, one party ignores us, the other one takes us for granted. Does this positively change that assumption model for many of these different communities in a good way?
Absolutely. I mean, there obviously has been for a long time an assumption, and it was borne out by the results on Election Day, for instance, that blacks were in the Democrats' pocket. And I think Biden won 90 to 7, with the other 3%, 90% to 7% in the exit polls among black voters. And, not that it changed dramatically, but young black men, there were certain elements in the black community that were voting, I think, over 20% for Trump. And, I don't think any voter should be taken for granted. I think everybody should be up for grabs, and people ought to feel they need to speak to them. And, what a huge wake-up call for the Democrats in this election when they suddenly saw constituencies that they thought they could completely depend on. I remember a few years ago when there was talk about the demographic time bomb and the idea that we are, and I don't know, frankly, whether we are not yet or not, but if not, we are almost there, where we're a majority-minority country. The majority of voters are not white Caucasians. And there was a feeling that just meant the inevitable takeover of politics by the Democrats. Well, we now see that isn't true, and I think that's only hopeful and helpful, that, you gotta earn every vote. Don't take anybody for granted.
I want to ask you a little bit about Trump Vance, his governing partner, who's much younger, a senator, more ideological in many ways than he is. In writing the book on Kennedy-Nixon and thinking about partnerships, do you have any thoughts or predictions about how this relationship is going to go?
Well, yeah, I mean, but Trump is kind of sui generis. I mean, he's different than anybody else. So let me first talk about the running mates in 1960. Henry Cabot Lodge was Nixon's running mate. He had been a former senator, in fact, beaten by Kennedy in 1950. And as senator from Massachusetts, he then became the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations and had quite a distinguished career there. He was a disaster as a running mate. He liked to take a nap. He didn't like to campaign at night. He kind of went off on his own. I told you what Richard Daley said about Nixon during the debate. Well, as soon as the debate was over, Lodge, who was watching it in a room with several reporters, said, "That son of a bitch just lost the election," which isn't what you want from your running mate. The other ticket is much more interesting, and this is another one of the great set pieces in this book, because Kennedy really did not want Lyndon Johnson to be his running mate, but Johnson was a tremendous power in the Democratic Party. He was the Senate Majority Leader. He had finished second in the vote. Kennedy really wanted Texas, and felt he needed it, and in fact he did. And so he he wanted to make an offer the day after he was nominated at the convention in LA. He wanted to make an offer to Johnson to be his running mate with the full expectation that Johnson would say no. And during the course, they were both staying in the same hotel, the Biltmore in LA, and because the reporters were camped out at the elevators, particularly on Kennedy's floor, but also on Johnson's, because he was kind of the obvious choice, they literally, Bobby Kennedy and Jack Kennedy are running up and down the stairs from the 9th floor where Kennedy's suite was to the 7th floor where Johnson's suite was, and trying to go back and forth, and to their horror and shock. And there's a great picture in the book of that Life magazine took of Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy. At one point, they're in a hotel room and they're seated like this in profile with the sun behind them, and you can tell they're really distressed. Suddenly, Johnson, who originally said no, is persuaded by some people that yes, he should take it, and he says, yeah, I will be I'll be your running mate. And then the Kennedys realize, oh my God, what have we done? And they try to get labor leaders and other people to come and raise hell about it. And Bobby goes down and talks to Lyndon and says, you know, it's going to cause a huge problem with the liberals, and it's going to cause a huge problem with labor. And Johnson almost breaks into tears and says, I really want it. And they gave it to him, and they were very unhappy about it. But in fact, part of the story in the book is rampant vote fraud in Texas that probably stole the state and gave those 24 electoral votes to John F. Kennedy for president. So they were happy with it in the end. In terms of now this president, I know that I've done selling my book a little bit. You know, it's interesting. I remember in 2017 when Trump first came in, about 3 months after he came in, Steve Bannon, who, if you remember, was very powerful and very important in the original Trump White House. Basically, there were two chief staff people. One was the chief of staff, Reince Priebus, and the other was Steve Bannon. And Bannon was on the cover of Time magazine by himself. And I remember thinking at the time, the boss is not going to like that. And within a couple of months, Bannon was out. I mean, Trump doesn't like to share the spotlight. So my guess is you're going to see Vance. He's certainly not going to be a partner in governing. He will be used for certain things. Trump, you know, will certainly use him. He's using him right now to try to shepherd some of these nominees through the Senate. But you know, how big a partner was Mike Pence during those 4 years? I don't know that Vance will be substantially more. In fact, to me, one of the most interesting dramas in Washington and the national scene right now is Trump and Elon Musk, because Musk is there and he's staying at Mar-a-Lago, and he just took Trump out to Texas to watch one of his SpaceX starships go up. And Trump doesn't share the spotlight, and you know, he may be sort of enamored of Musk, but I would say that generally one of the big issues in Washington right now is, you know, what's the over/under on how long Donald Trump puts up with Elon Musk? And I would say take the under on that bet.
You know, I'm thinking of a different tech company, because given what he's done in the last 2 weeks, it seems as though he's living by move fast and break things as a philosophy. I was hired to break things, to really change things. But when you talk to people in DC who are in the government, they will remind you it is a behemoth. Many, many, many layers. How much change can he actually make? I mean, clearly it seems as though they will move to bring in a lot of people who share a certain ideology, a certain point of view. How much change are we in for?
Well, as much, I mean, I don't know that I can answer it, but as much as Donald Trump can accomplish. I mean, I think you've seen it in two respects already. First of all, you've seen these nominees, a lot of whom really have shocked Republicans, and I'm talking about like Senate Republicans and House Republicans as well. And one of the sort of mad genius things about Donald Trump is one of the ways he avoids one scandal or one conflict or one controversy is to pile on more of them, so that you can't really focus. I mean, just when your mind is exploding about Pete Hegseth, the weekend anchor on Fox News, being the Secretary of Defense, when he's never run anything, and this is he has 2.8 million civilian and military employees. Suddenly Matt Gaetz is appointed, and then Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is appointed. So you don't quite know what to fasten on, because there's a bright shiny object here and there's a bright shiny object here, and it's one of the ways he deals with the media and kind of keeps people, sort of like a dog. If you ever, terrible thing to admit, I have done this on occasion, taken a laser pointer and put it on the floor and the dog chases the laser light around. It's kind of, that's the way we are in the media with Trump. But there are some substantial things he's tried to do now that are breaking, in some cases, the Constitution. I mean, one of the things he is saying to the Senate is, you need to go on recess, and I will just appoint these people, and you don't have to confirm them, and we'll treat them as recess appointments, which means they would get to stay. If they appointed them in January or February, they would get to remain as the Secretary of State, for instance, until December of 26, so basically 2 years. Well, Article 2 of the Constitution says the President shall appoint officials by the consent, advice and consent of the Senate. So if the senators go along with that, they are really, yes, recess appointments are in the Constitution, but it was written at a time when it used to take weeks to get to Washington, which, except when the TSA really breaks down, is no longer the case, would be a real abdication of their responsibility. I don't think they're going to do it, but it's interesting that Trump is demanding they do it. The other thing Trump is doing, to give you a sense of how much he wants to change and break things, a lot of these people are being appointed or named without any FBI vetting at all, which is unprecedented. I mean, he's not signed an agreement with the GSA for transition, so the Trump officials are not allowed to go into the various departments that they'll be taking over. He's not doing the vetting that normally is done with the FBI. He's going to try to change the system as much as he can, and I can't predict exactly, but despite, and you're quite right, Tam, that the bureaucracy is very resistant to change, and there are a lot of traditions and all of that. I think 2 years from now, if we were to sit here, we would agree that the headline was not how little things had changed, but how much things had changed.
What is the right stance for the media? You talked about the dog with the pointer. And part of what happens when you react is eventually you look hysterical. That everything he does, the media is going nuts. And you can see the exhaustion the public has, including on the left. Is it right to ignore some of what he does, to take the long view, to choose your shots? How should the media position itself?
Well, it's a good question. It's something that we're all asking ourselves. In fact, I think it was John Fetterman, your senator here, who said the media can't go into hysterics, and Democrats can't go into hysterics over every little thing Trump says or does, because to a certain degree, even if it's true, it's not like the boy who cried wolf, but to a certain degree you lose your effectiveness and you numb people to what it is. So I don't know the answer to that. You certainly can't ignore it. You have to report it, but maybe, and one of the things I have learned over the years is that the DEFCONs, if you think DEFCON 6 is the highest level, actually it's the lowest level, DEFCON 1 is the highest level. Maybe we need to be at DEFCON 4 or 5 more often and not at 1 or 2. I mean, I do think there is a danger we fall into of, oh my God, this is just outrageous. And at a certain point, people, they become numb to it. It's an interesting thing. There was a column today that I read. I didn't think I was going to be quoting Daniel Patrick Moynihan twice tonight. But he wrote a book called Defining Deviancy Down. And what he was basically saying is that what the country was doing, this was during the Nixon administration, was it was becoming number to things and was less and less outraged about stuff. And that basically what he's saying, you have to define deviancy up so you remain vigilant about things, and you remain shocked and you don't become numb to some of the stuff that Trump's doing in terms of the total lack of experience or even downright opposition of some of his appointments to the departments they're going to be running, and some of the ways he's trying to remove the guardrails. I'll tell you an interesting thing, too, that was suggested. But somehow you can't define deviancy all the way down, but you can't put it all the way up that everything that's wrong is wrong, and we got to call it out, too. So it's a tough and delicate question. So one of the interesting things that somebody was pointing to, you've got this non-governmental commission. There have been commissions before to try to cut waste and trim things, and it's going to be run by Musk and Ramaswamy, the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. And one of the suggestions somebody had, because the bureaucracy, and there are a lot of protections for civil servants, although there's a Schedule F that they can impose, which would allow them to fire people. One of the easy things they could do is simply demand that everybody go back to work 5 days a week. And some of these departments have moved out of Washington. And, I saw the Brandywine thing about creating a hybrid atmosphere where people have a meaningful experience in their office building, but also have some time remote. If you suddenly told government workers who don't have Brandywine building office buildings for them, did you see how I got a plug for the sponsor in here? Come on. Come on. That's not nothing. But in any case, I think a lot of people would say, no, I think I'll find something else to do. Because Washington is really, ghost town's too strong, but it's quite a lot of the downtown offices and, sandwich shops and hair salons and things like that have gone out of business because Washington is still very much on a hybrid and largely remote schedule, which I happen to think is a mistake because it does end up having a tremendous impact on center cities.
We're down to the last couple of minutes, 2 last quick questions. I think people in a group like this often wonder, when there's so much distrust, disunion, what can you do? I was listening to Anne Applebaum on the way over here, and Ezra Klein asked her that question, and she said, join something. Join the Rotary, join the Committee of 70, become a poll worker, run for something, create these bonds in a different way. What are your thoughts on when people say, she said, don't become apathetic, don't just say that's the way it is. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, no, I think that's a really good advice, and it's interesting. I just read something somebody sent to me that is going to come out, and I don't want to preempt it, but a top official in the Biden administration basically has an essay, and I was honored that he asked me to look at it. And when you read it, you'll say, oh, that's what Chris was talking about. He talks about community, and he talked about the importance of, and he talked about it in a broad sense. He talked about it in a personal sense that, we've got to stop not talking to neighbors who have a Trump or Biden sign on their front yard. He talked about volunteering. He talked about reaching out. He talked about joining something, creating a sense of community. Look, is that going to change the course of this country over the next 2 years or whatever? No, but organizations like this where people join together and don't feel powerless, don't feel apathetic, and feel that there's, in small steps, and maybe it happens here in Philadelphia, and maybe it happens in Harrisburg, and, maybe that affects who the next senator is, or, and it spreads around the country like pollen, that it just gives people a sense of empowerment, which I think is really important. If this election went your way, you feel pretty darn empowered. If it didn't go your way, I think doing something to take some agency, some sense that there is something I can do, is a very constructive answer.
And a question that I'm sure you get, that I've been getting, regardless of how people have voted for him, against him, everywhere I go, people come up to me and say, are we going to be okay? And so your thoughts on that, are we going to be okay?
What do you say?
I say I asked you first.
No, it's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I gotta believe in America, and I think, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Am I concerned about what a president, this president could do over the next 4 years? I'm not sure. And you know, over the last 4 years, and particularly, one of the reasons that I wrote this book, part of it was because I just thought the 1960 election was a great story, but one of the other reasons I wrote the book was because I thought there were real parallels between 1960 and 2020 and what Trump has taken us through these last 4 years. And because 1960, it almost turns 2020 on its head. It's an election that I think really may have been stolen. There are two states in particular, Illinois and Texas, which I talked about, rampant vote fraud. And if just those two states had changed, that would have elected Richard Nixon as president in 1960, not John Kennedy. Interestingly enough, Nixon, who is not generally seen as, you know, one of the great rule followers and, you know, selfless people in American history, was a rule follower and a selfless person, even though he was under a lot of pressure from people in his party to contest the election. That was unthinkable in 1960, and we were at the height of the Cold War. The idea that you would go to the courts and the country, when we're facing Nikita Khrushchev, wasn't going to know who the leader of the free world was. It was unthinkable to Richard Nixon. And so he conceded the election. He met with Kennedy about a week after the election when a reporter for the New York Herald Tribune tried to do an investigation to show the fraud. He shut him down. And when the reporter refused to stop, Nixon called his editors and said, "Stop it, it's bad for the country." And when on the inaugural stand on January 20th, he was the first person after Nixon was sworn in, Kennedy was sworn in, Nixon was maybe the first or second to come over and shake his hand. He also presided as vice president over the counting of the electoral ballots on January 6th, contrast to 2021. I don't know, but I guess I have faith in the American experiment. And the point I was going to make is we were very fortunate in 2021 that the guardrails held, the center held, and 60 of the 61 courtrooms that heard cases involving Trump found that throughout the Trump cases, the only one was a technicality, wasn't anything substantive. And in the end, the vice president on January 6th did the right thing and didn't throw out the ballots or send it back to the states, but certified the election. It wasn't a sure thing that was going to happen. And so if you say to me, are we going to be okay? Is the center going to hold? Are the institutions going to protect us the way they're supposed to? To be continued.
Well, there's a cocktail party after this. And I would suggest you all raise a glass to Richard Nixon. Chris, this was wonderful. If you're a member of the Committee of 70, please come up. We're going to take a picture. But for the rest of you, that cocktail party is downstairs. And again, I want to thank you. It is people like you who participate in our democracy, uphold it, engage others. Please do not stop. Never have you been more needed. So thank you.
Thank you.